الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: إذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعاني. صلوات أكبر. Tonight is a majlis that we are commemorating the wafat of Baby Khadija salawatullah alayha. Keeping with the spirit of the month of Ramadan, I would like to just mention one dimension just as an example of one of the teachings that we have from the Islamic values. When it comes to the month of Ramadan, it is obviously linked to the process of fasting. But it is also the month which is linked to the Holy Quran, and the tradition that we have of reciting the Holy Quran is part of, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even talks that this is the month in which the Quran was revealed. But there is one third dimension to the month of Ramadan, and that is its link with dua, the prayers that we have during this month from the Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. It's not just a cultural issue, it's actually based on the teachings of the Quran itself. Interestingly, the ayat in Surah Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ayat number 180 onwards talks about the issue of fasting, where the order comes for the first time, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam, that all you who believe, fasting has been made wajib on you. There, part of the ayat, where Allah talks about the rulings about fasting, there is one ayat which says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ عَنِّي, that, O Muhammad, when my servants ask you about me, when they say, where is Allah? Respond to them by saying, فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ, tell to them I'm very close to them. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِي, I respond to their du'as when they call me. So this ayat is there in the passages about the month of Ramadan. So the tradition that we have of reciting extra du'as in the month of Ramadan is actually enshrined in the Quran itself. And then, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I listen to their du'as, فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي, they also need to respond to me, to my message. وَلِيُؤْمِنُوا بِي, and they need to trust in me. If you do dua half-heartedly, without really relying on the tawakkul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's not really, believing in Him in the true sense. And so, keeping with that tradition, we have many, many du'as during this month. One very famous dua, which I would like to use as a base for understanding the example of Bibi Khadija, is this famous dua that we recite almost every night. Although it is not only for the night prayers, it can be recited after any prayers of the month of Ramadan. And this is actually from the Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The dua which begins with the words, Allahumma adkhil ala ahli al-qubur as-surur, going on to Allahumma aghna kulla faqir. Now, if you look at that dua, and this is a point that I, have mentioned many, many times, that I don't shy away from repeating what is important. Ramadan comes every year anyway, it's repeated. So if I have to emphasize a point regarding Ramadan and dua, I have to do that. Um, Dua is not only to reading and reciting it. When the Prophet and the Imam tells us, this is the dua I recommend that you read, try to look into it. That yes, you had to do this dua. You had to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these items. But there is also an indirect message from the Prophet and the Imams. That see whether you yourself can be part of this process or not. Whether it's about yourself or others. And so in this dua, if you see from the Prophet, just because of the interest of time, I'll just make it very quick. I'll not go through the whole Arabic part of it. You hear it every, I think, after Isha or Maghrib. Allahumma adkhil ala ahli al-qubur surur. It starts with praying for those who have passed away. But then the dua goes back to the people who are alive. Number one, aghni kulla faqir. Oh Allah, make every poor person free from need. Ashbi' kulla jai. Oh Allah, feed everyone who is hungry. Uksa kulla uryan. Oh Allah, provide decent clothing for anyone who doesn't have proper clothing. Allahumma ghdi kulla dayna kulla madeen. Oh Allah, anyone who is in debt, make them free from debts. Farrijan kulla makroob. Oh Allah, relieve those who are going through distress. Or rudda kulla ghareeb. Oh Allah, those who are away from their family, their homeland, especially those who have been displaced. Oh Allah, give them the opportunity to go back to their homes. Allahumma fakka kulla asir. Oh Allah, those prisoners who are in prison innocently. Oh Allah, provide relief for them and release for them. وَأَصْلَحْ كُلَّ فَاسِدٍ مِّنْ أُمُورِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And Allah, put everything which is wrong from the affairs of the ummah, put it right. Allahumma shfi kulla mariz. Oh Allah, give healing to those who are marid. And then at the end, after having prayed for these individuals and categories, then Allah says, and then Rasulullah says to us, pray for yourself now. At the end, Allahumma sudda faqrana. Oh Allah, relieve me of our poverty. Allahumma ghayir su'a halina bi husni halik. Change our condition from the negative to positive. Oh Allah, fulfill our debts and make us free from need. If you see here, basically, the Prophet of Islam is actually giving us a message that yes, you need to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is one way of, doing the dua, and you do dua for others before you pray for yourself. But even then, you're talking about faqir, the person who is poor, hungry, without clothing, who are in debts, distress, displaced from their homes, in prison innocently. The question is that, should we just be sitting there and praying? There is a message from Rasulullah in this dua that yes, do the dua for them. But also look at your situation. Can you, do something to relieve the poverty of a poor person? Can you, for example, feed somebody who is hungry? Can you provide decent clothing to somebody who needs clothing? Can you yourself do this? It's not only to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, there is a ayat that you recite every Thursday night in Surah Yasin. That those who are kafir, this is the scenery of the days of early days of Islam in Mecca, that the kafirin say to the mu'mineen, أَنُطْعِمُ مَنْ لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُ. Should we, when they are told that, from what Allah has blessed you, feed those who are poor. Their response is, why should we, feed somebody that if Allah wants, He can do it Himself. So when we are doing dua here, what are we saying? Oh Allah, I'm praying for them, you do it. Does Allah come and do that directly? Is there any poor, hungry person that can say, I received, this food package, express delivery by Jibreel? Other than Maryam. Her case was exception. That's a different story. Nobody. But we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a raziq. How does He provide this rizq? He doesn't feed anyone directly. He uses wasilah. He uses intermediaries. When we recite this dua, the Prophet actually is asking us that also have this intention that, oh Allah, make me the wasilah to fulfill the needs of the poor, the hungry, those who are less, those don't have clothing, or even to relieve the deaths of some of the people. Salawat. And that's the sense of this dua that we have from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If you look at the example of Bibi Khadija and her role in Islam, basically, if you would like to see an example of somebody who used the blessing that Allah had given to her in order to help others, is the example of Khadija. She came from a very affluent background. She was one of the wealthiest person in Mecca. In Quran there is a surah by the name of Surah Quraysh, which talks about the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the tribe of Quraysh. And Allah talks about ilafihim, their travel. Two caravans of the Meccan merchants would go. Fi shita, it was safe in winter and summer. In winter, basically, they would be going to Yemen, and in summer, they would be going to Damascus. And this is where we see that, Yemen those days was the port city. The so-called Silk Road passed through there also. Means the goods from China and India would be coming by sea to Yemen. And these Meccan merchants would be there. They will buy that with the goods that they have from the north, being sold to traders who will go back to India and China. And then this caravan during the summertime, they will go to Damascus. Damascus was actually the central market where the merchants would come from Africa, Abyssinia, Egypt, and also from Eastern Roman Empire. So that would be the central point of trading for Eastern Europe and the African continent. And so this other caravan would go there, taking the goods from East for Africa and the Eastern Europe, and also getting goods from over there. So the merchants of Mecca were basically the middlemen. And in these caravans, which used to go twice a year to Yemen and Damascus, they would have, in the commentary of the surah, it says they would have about 2,000 to 3,000 camels, with the loads of goods. And almost half of them belonged to Khadija, salawatullah alayha. And so she came from a very, very, affluent background. But the point is that she was an affluent person, but she was not infected by affluenza. She was the Malika, owner of the wealth. She was not the slave of the wealth. She was not tied to her wealth. And you can see that in her choice of marriage. She had proposal from many, many people who were equally on the social and economic, status of the time. But her choice was not those people. Because she was known, even before the marriage to the Prophet, she was known as a tahira, somebody who was pure in her character. And the way she came to know about Rasulullah was when Abu Talib brought him to Khadija with the request that I would like you to employ my nephew so that he can become independent. And this is where Khadija appointed the Prophet as the manager of the trade caravan which was living for Damascus. And she assigned one of her slave girls or servants to be with Rasulullah in this trade caravan to monitor his behavior and how he interacted with the merchants. And based on that, when the caravan came back, which came with a good profit, and the report that she gave to Khadija, this is where she comes to realize about the character and akhlaq of Rasulullah. His honesty, his integrity, his truthfulness. He was known as a Sadiq and Amin even from before. But it was the akhlaq which impressed Khadija. And that was the beginning of the whole process of even, talking about becoming, the wife of the Prophet. And I would call her actually the first lady of Islam. Nobody can take that place. Rasulullah had many other wives, but all there in Medina. हमारे एक बहुत मशहूर खतीब गुजरे हैं, खुदा रहमत करे. This is something to be said only in Urdu, so I'm just saying that one sentence. Where he said, रसूल ने सिर्फ एक शादी की थी, बकिया बीबियों ने रसूल से शादी की थी. Okay, now you ask the translation from those who understand Urdu. Salawat padhte. And the point of wasilah that I mentioned earlier, that the Prophet is telling us to pray, to relieve the suffering of the people, the hunger of the people. Our message from Rasulullah to us is that try to be part of that process. When it comes to the Prophet himself, in Surah Al-Duha, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counts the blessings that He has given to the Prophet. This is the early days of wahi, and just to boost the morale of Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is consoling him. Don't worry about the opposition. I'm there. I have blessed you before. And the very first thing He says, remember you were an orphan. And we provided, supporter, guardian for you in form of your grandfather, and soon after that, in form of Abu Talib, your uncle. And then, وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا. And don't you remember that we found you to be lost among your people? Not lost in a meaning of misguidance. You were unknown among your people. Not known, a lost entity. فَهَدَى. And there Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them to Him. They came to realize that, He's a Nabi. And the third blessing, He says, وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala found you to be in need. And then He provided you, made you free from need. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do it? Did He set down Jibreel with containers of, dinar and dinhar? Or gold and silver? No. Through the mal of Khadija. Khadija becomes the wasilah, the intermediary between the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this is where we see that, she dedicated her entire wealth and gave it at the disposal of Rasulullah after marriage, and he said, you do whatever you think is fit. And then when, at the age of, so this is about, when the Prophet was 25 years old, after 15 years when Islam started, and this is where we see that those Muslims who were socially and financially weak, then they were being oppressed. Those who had social support from the family and the tribe were okay. And this is where the Prophet uses the wealth of Khadija to support them. It's not even far-fetched to claim that even the first migration of such people, of Muslims in Mecca to Abyssinia, was financed by the mal and the wealth of Khadija salawatullah alayha. Salawat padhne ke बाद. And that's why, the Prophet in our sources has a statement where he says, ما قام ولا استقام ديني إلا بشيئين. That my religion, Islam, did not stand up and did not survive except by two things. مال خديجة وسيف علي. With the wealth of Khadija and the sword of Ali. Salawat padhne ke बाद. And this is where we come to realize that, when we talk about the role of Khadija, it's not that Islam is saying don't become rich. Islam doesn't shun the blessings and the affluence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to you. But do not be tied to it. Control it and build your akhirah. And you can build your akhirah only in this dunya, not there. You will not be able to buy anything over there. Whatever you want to do, you will have to do it here. And that is the sense that you control it and use it in the best manner. And that's the example that we see from Khadija salawatullah alayha. Salawat padhne ke बाद. Janabe, just moving towards the Masaib, just few words in Urdu. جناب خدیجہ کے جذبہ قربانی کی جو بات ہو رہی ہے کہ صاحب دولت و ثروت تھی لیکن یہ مالکہ تھی، اپنے دولت اور دینار اور درہم اور سونا اور چاندی کے غلام اور بندی نہیں تھی، بلکہ اسے کنٹرول کرتی ہیں، استعمال کرتی ہیں خدا کی راہ میں۔ اس کی بہترین مثال ہم لوگ ملتی ہے جناب خدیجہ کے زندگی کے آخری دور میں، جب قریش نے بنو ہاشم کو بوائکاٹ کیا ہے، سوشو ایکونومک سینکشنز جو آج کل کہے جاتے ہیں، کہ جس میں کسی کو اجازت نہیں تھی کہ بنو ہاشم کے ساتھ کوئی سوشل انٹریکشن رکھے، ملنا جلنا ہو۔ اس زمانے میں شادی بھی بند کر دی تھی، ان کے خاندانوں سے بند کر دی گئی تھی، اور یہاں تک کہ ان کے ساتھ لین دین they couldn't buy anything from anyone or sell anything to anyone. ٹوٹل سوشو اکنامک بوائکاٹ تھا۔ اور جناب ابو طالب نے جب دیکھا کہ یہ صورتحال ہے، جان بھی خطرے میں ہے بنو ہاشم کی، تو وہ اپنے پورے کنبے کو لے کے جاتے ہیں۔ ایک ان کی پراپرٹی تھی جسٹ آؤٹ سائڈ مکہ جس کو شعب ابی طالب کہتے ہیں، اور وہاں وہ لے گئے تاکہ وہ پروٹیکشن میں رہیں۔ 3 سال تک یہ پیکٹ چلا ہے قریش کا اگینسٹ بنو ہاشم۔ کس طرح سے ختم ہوا اس کی گفتگو انشاءاللہ کسی اور وقت ہوگی، لیکن یہ 3 سال کے عرصے میں جو مصیبتیں اٹھائی ہیں بنو ہاشم نے، جس طرح سے ابو طالب اور جناب فاطمہ بنت اسد نے رسول اسلام اور اپنے کنبے کی حفاظت کی ہے، اس کی مثال کہیں نہیں ملتی ہے۔ یہ جو آپ سنتے رہتے ہیں کہ یہاں تک کہ رسول اسلام کے جان کو بچانے کے لیے ان کی سونے کی جگہ بھی بدلی جاتی تھی، تاکہ یہ نہ ہو کہ اگر کوئی تاریکی شب میں دشمن آتے ہیں حملہ کرنے کے لیے تو انہیں اندازہ ہو جائے کہ رسول کہاں پہ ہیں. اور یہی وہ جذبہ ہے جو ابو طالب اور فاطمہ بنت اسد کے خانوادوں میں چلا ہے. آپ دیکھیں گے شہدائے کربلا میں جو شہدائے بنو ہاشم کی بات ہوتی ہے یہ ایکچولی سب کے سب آل ابی طالب تھے. ابو طالب اور فاطمہ بنت اسد کی نسل کے لوگ تھے. اسی 3 سال میں جناب خدیجہ بھی تھی. وہ خاتون جنہوں نے اپنی زندگی لگژری لائف سٹائل میں گزاری ہو، جنہوں نے اپنی زندگی آرام اور سکون کے ساتھ گزاری ہو، ان 3 سالوں میں کبھی بھی آپ کو کوئی روایت نہیں ملے گی کہ خدیجہ نے کبھی بھی شکایت کی ہو رسول اسلام سے کہ یہ کس مصیبت میں ہم پڑے ہیں. نہیں، بلکہ اسلام کو سب سے پہلے قبول کرنے والی خدیجہ ہے اور تمام قربانی اور مصیبت میں مکہ کے دور میں رسول اسلام کے ساتھ رہی، قدم بقدم رہی ہیں، ساتھ رہی ہیں. یہاں تک کہ یہ بوائیکاٹ جب ختم ہوا ہے اور اس کا اثر جناب ابو طالب اور جناب خدیجہ کے صحت پہ پڑا ہے. ودن فیو ویکس پہلے جناب ابو طالب کی وفات واقع ہوتی ہے اور اس کے بعد جناب خدیجہ کی وفات واقع ہوتی ہے. اور ان دونوں وفاتوں کا اثر رسول اسلام کے دل پر اتنا گہرا تھا کہ رسول نے اس سال کو کہا ہے عام الحزن، یعنی دی ایئر آف گریف اینڈ سورو. یہ غم کا سال ہے ہمارے لیے. اور یقیناً رسول اکثر یہ کہا کرتے تھے کہ میرے 2 حمایتی ستون تھے. I had 2 strong pillars of support، خدیجہ اور ابو طالب. لیکن دونوں کے گزرنے کے بعد جو کیفیت طاری ہو جاتی ہے، یہاں تک کہ قریش میں یہ ہمت بڑھ جاتی ہے کہ وہ رسول کو ایسیسینیٹ کرنا چاہتے ہیں. اس وقت آپ دیکھیں کہ خداوند عالم نے پھر حکم دیا کہ اب آپ مکہ میں نہیں رہیں گے اور آپ جا کے ہجرت کریں مدینہ کی طرف. بس آج ہم لوگ جناب سیدہ کی خدمت میں پرسہ دینے کے لیے جمع ہوئے ہیں کہ بی بی یقیناً آپ کمسنی کی دور سے گزری ہیں جب ماں کا سایہ آپ کے سر سے اٹھ گیا ہے، اور یہ مشکل دور تھا خصوصاً جب دشمنوں میں گرا ہوا ہو انسان، جہاں ہمدردی کرنے والا کوئی نہ ہو. لیکن مجھے ایک اور مثال یاد آتی ہے جس طرح سے رسول نے اپنے لیے کہا تھا کہ میرے 2 حمایتی ستون تھے خدیجہ اور ابو طالب، ان کے گرنے کے بعد میرے لیے مکہ محفوظ جگہ نہیں رہی. علی بھی یہی جملہ ادا کرتے تھے اپنے بارے میں، کہتے تھے میرے 2 حمایتی ستون تھے، ایک رسول اللہ کی شکل میں اور دوسری فاطمہ الزہرا کی شکل میں. اور یہ جملہ اس وقت ادا کیا ہے کہ جب جناب سیدہ کو دفن کرتے ہیں، دفن کرنے کے بعد قبر پر کھڑے ہو کے جو جملے کہے ہیں اس میں سے یہی جملہ کہا تھا کہ ایک ستون پہلے گرا تھا اور میرا دوسرا حمایتی ستون آج گرا ہے. آج علی جو ہیں بالکل تنہا ہیں. بس مولا کی خدمت میں پرسے کے طور پہ صرف اتنا کہیں گے، مولا آپ نے جناب سیدہ کو دفن کر دیا، لیکن مجھے ایک اور علی یاد آتا ہے کہ جو کربلا سے روانہ ہوا ہے لیکن اپنے بابا کو، اپنے چچا اور بھائیوں کے لاش کو کربلا کے اس سرزمین پر بے گور و کفن چھوڑ کے جاتا ہے. الا لعنۃ اللہ علی القوم الظالمین سیعلم الذین ظلموا ای منقلب ینقلبون. ماتم حسین.